I still remember the look on my son's face when he told me I had 24 hours to pack my things and leave the home I'd raised him in. After 28 years of sacrificing everything for David, working 3 jobs to put him through college, postponing my own dreams, even donating my kidney to his father, I found myself homeless at 58 because I'd lost my job during the pandemic. What David didn't know when he slammed that door in my face was that my former boss had left me $8 million in his will. I stood there on the sidewalk, tears streaming down my face, clutching a letter that would change everything. Sometimes life's cruelest moments lead to the most unexpected second chances. This is how I rebuilt my life after my own son threw me away like garbage. The first time I saw David, he was sitting alone in the corner of the group home's activity room. He was smaller than the other kids, with a faded Spider-Man t-shirt and fresh bruises circling his wrists. When the social worker called his name, he looked up with this hardened expression I recognized immediately. It was the same look I had in my 3rd grade school photo, taken 2 days after my father left. My parents sat me down that night with a list of reasons why adopting an 8-year-old boy was a mistake. "You're barely making ends meet as it is," my mother said, stirring her coffee like she always did when nervous. "And that file said he broke a foster mother's nose last month." The social worker had shown me his records, 7 placements in 3 years, each return documented with escalating incidents. The last family wrote in their report, "David cannot be trusted around younger children." I brought him home on a Tuesday. He didn't speak for the first 3 days, just watched me from doorways with this guarded stare. When I tried to hug him goodnight, he jerked back so violently he hit his head on the wall. The sound his body made when he curled into a ball on the floor, that's what made me sign up for parenting classes the next morning. That first year cost me $12,000 I didn't have. There were weekly therapy sessions where David would kick the legs of his chair for 45 straight minutes. I took night classes on trauma bonding while eating ramen at the back of the community center. When his school called about the 3rd suspension, this time for throwing a chair at his teacher, I sat in the principal's office realizing the system wasn't built for kids like him, or for mothers like me. Quitting my accounting job meant losing health insurance, but I couldn't leave him with strangers anymore. We turned the dining room into a classroom with secondhand textbooks. I taught fractions using pizza slices and history through comic books. Some days he'd scream that he hated me, then cry himself to sleep clutching my sleeve. By year 3, the violent outbursts became less frequent. He started calling me mom, without prompting. The therapist showed me scans of how his brain activity was changing. The amygdala wasn't lighting up at the sound of raised voices anymore. I framed his first passing report card and ignored the collection notices piling up on the counter. Looking back, I can see how those early years set the tone for everything that came after. Every time David needed something, I gave it, even when it meant going without. When he wanted the $200 sneakers all the kids were wearing, I sold my winter coat. When he begged to go to summer camp, I took a second job delivering newspapers at 4 a.m. I told myself this was what love looked like: constant sacrifice with no expectation of return. The day David's acceptance letter arrived from Northwestern, I was sitting in a doctor's office staring at an ultrasound of my thyroid. The doctor pointed to a shadowy mass the size of a grape. "We should biopsy this immediately," he said. I folded the scan into my purse next to the envelope with the university crest. I sold my grandmother's emerald engagement ring to pay his $3,000 enrollment deposit. The jeweler gave me $1,800, half what it was worth, but I didn't have time to shop around. I needed the money before the housing deadline passed. My biopsy got rescheduled 3 times because I couldn't take time off work. For 4 years, I worked 3 jobs: the gas station from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the diner from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. on weekends, and my bookkeeping gig Monday through Friday afternoons. I slept in 2-hour chunks, usually in my car between shifts. The diner manager let me take home leftover soup, which became most of my meals. David's tuition was $48,000 a year after financial aid. I took out a second mortgage on my house and maxed out 3 credit cards. When he wanted to study abroad in Rome sophomore year, I withdrew $12,000 from my 401k and paid the early withdrawal penalty. He sent me a selfie in front of the Coliseum while I was eating canned beans for the 3rd night in a row. The night before his graduation, I checked into a Motel 6 near campus. I remember standing in the bathroom staring at my reflection, the dark circles under my eyes, the way my collarbones stuck out. When I bent down to pick up my toiletry bag, my vision went black. I woke up on the tile floor with a bruise forming on my hip. David called while I was icing it. "Did you remember to bring my good dress shirt?" he asked. I told him I'd fallen in the shower, but he just sighed and said to be on time tomorrow. At commencement, he introduced me to his girlfriend Jessica. She was wearing a designer dress and kept adjusting the strap like it might catch something from me. My own dress came from Goodwill, a navy polyester thing with a small coffee stain near the hem I'd tried to scrub out. When I went to hug David after the ceremony, Jessica pulled him away to take photos with her parents. I never told him about the $227,000 in total debt I took on for his education. Not when he complained about the used Honda I bought him instead of a new car. Not when he asked why I couldn't help with his apartment deposit in Chicago. Not even when he called me 2 years later to say Jessica wanted a destination wedding in Maui and could I contribute. The first time I said no was when I lost my job during the pandemic. David had just bought his house with the guest cottage I was supposed to move into. When I told him I couldn't pay his $900 car payment that month, he didn't ask if I had enough food. He just said, "You always find a way. What's different now?" The call came at 2:37 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. David's voice shook as he told me his father was in the ICU. After 15 years of silence, Greg showed up in our lives again, yellow-skinned from liver failure, his belly swollen with fluid. The doctor said he had weeks to live without a transplant. When the test results came back, the transplant coordinator looked stunned. "You're the only match we've found," she said. Never mind that Greg had left us when David was 3. Never mind that I had chronic high blood pressure that made surgery risky. David gripped my hand in that hospital corridor. "Mom, he's my dad," he pleaded. Jessica stood behind him nodding, her designer purse bumping against the wall. They scheduled the surgery for December 18th. 2 days before, David brought over a care package. Microwave meals, a new robe. "Jess and I will take turns staying with you," he promised, adjusting the thermostat in my apartment. His father had already checked into the luxury recovery suite Jessica booked for him. I remember the anesthesiologist counting backward from 10. I remember waking up alone in a curtained-off bay, my abdomen burning. The nurse said David had stepped out for coffee 6 hours earlier. My phone showed 17 texts from him, all about Jessica's surprise birthday getaway to Aspen. "Don't worry, we hired a nurse for Dad," read the last one. The hired aide came to my apartment exactly twice. Mostly, I crawled to the bathroom clutching a pillow to my stitches. The pharmacy wouldn't fill my painkiller prescription because Greg's insurance wouldn't cover his donor. David texted once to ask if I could forward his father's medical bills to my address. 6 months later, Greg sent a thank you card with a $50 Starbucks gift card inside. When he died 2 years after that, his will left everything to Jessica. The vintage Cadillac, the Florida condo, even the baseball cards he'd promised David since childhood. At the reading, the lawyer mentioned Greg had changed the documents 3 weeks post-transplant. The termination email arrived at 3:17 a.m. on a Thursday. After 19 years at Callaway & Stern, the message took up 3 lines. "Due to pandemic restructuring, your position has been eliminated. Access to all systems has been revoked. Personal items will be mailed to you. No severance, no thank you. Just a PDF of my final paycheck with 12 hours of unused vacation time paid out." I sat on my couch watching the sunrise through the blinds, calculating how long my savings would last. When the eviction notice came 2 weeks later, I drove straight to David's house. He'd bought the place 6 months earlier, a 4-bedroom colonial with a guest cottage out back. At the closing, he'd joked, "This'll be perfect when you're too old to live alone." Now I stood on his porch with the court papers in my hand, my suitcase in the car. Jessica answered the door in yoga pants, her phone pressed to her ear. She held up one finger and finished her conversation about spin class times before looking at me. David appeared behind her, his work shirt still creased from the dry cleaner. I started explaining about the layoff, but Jessica cut me off. "We actually have something for you," she said. She came back with a sheet of printer paper folded in thirds. It was a list of homeless shelters, ranked by cleanliness with little stars next to the ones that allowed pets. I remember the third item had a handwritten note. "St. Mary's serves hot meals on Tuesdays." David wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept adjusting his watch like the strap was too tight. "I thought I could stay in the guest house," I said. Jessica laughed, an actual laugh, and said, "We turned that into my Pilates studio last month." The room behind her was full of pink equipment, the windows draped in sheer curtains. David finally spoke while looking at the floor. "Mom, you're not our responsibility anymore." I went back to my car to get the rest of my things. Through the open window, I heard them arguing. "I told you she'd try this," Jessica said. David's voice got louder. "Are you sure she didn't take the good towels? There were 6, and now there's 5. The last thing I took from my apartment was a photo of David's first day of kindergarten. He's holding my hand, his backpack almost as big as he was. I left it on their kitchen counter when I went back for my toothbrush. Jessica was in the living room scrolling through Zillow listings. "There's a studio for $800 a month in the bad part of town," she called after me. I slept in my car that night outside a 24-hour laundromat. At 2 a.m., I called David one last time. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "This isn't fair to Jess," he said. "We're trying to start a family." I could hear her in the background asking who it was. He hung up while saying, "You'll figure something out." The next morning, I washed my hair in the laundromat sink. A woman at the dryers gave me a granola bar and the address of a food pantry. I remember thinking how strange it was. This stranger offered more help than my own son. I sat on a bus stop bench with my suitcase wedged between my knees, counting the last $27 in my wallet. The envelope from Callaway & Stern looked out of place against the peeling bench paint. My hands shook when I saw the attorney's name in the corner, the same one who'd handled my termination. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a letter dated 3 months earlier. Mr. Callaway had updated his will after the firm's holiday party. The night David showed up drunk and demanded I cover his Uber. I remember how he'd snapped his fingers at me like I was still his secretary. Mr. Callaway watched the whole thing from the bar without saying a word. The second page listed assets totaling $8 million. His Nantucket house, a stock portfolio, even his vintage watch collection. At the bottom was a handwritten note on his personal stationery. "Margaret, for 30 years you made my coffee with exactly 1 sugar cube. You remembered my daughter's birthday when I forgot. You stayed late to fix my mistakes and never took credit. This is what happens when someone finally sees you." A bus pulled up, its doors wheezing open. I didn't get on. Instead, I walked to the nearest hotel, a place with a doorman and marble floors where I'd once dropped off dry cleaning for Mr. Callaway. The clerk eyed my wrinkled clothes but took the black Amex from the envelope. The penthouse smelled like lemon polish and money. I sat on the bed and ran my hand over sheets so crisp they felt like paper. There was a fruit basket with grapes the size of quarters. I ate one and started crying, not because it was delicious, but because no one had given me fruit in 20 years. That night, I took a bath in a tub bigger than my first apartment's kitchen. The bubbles smelled like lavender. I thought about the last bath I'd taken, in my old place, with the dripping faucet and mildew stains. David had called during it to complain about his steak being overcooked at dinner. At 3 a.m., I ordered room service, a $92 steak I barely touched. The waiter asked if I wanted wine. I said yes because no one was there to tell me not to. When he left, I stood at the window looking at the city lights. Somewhere out there, David was sleeping in his guest room turned Pilates studio. He had no idea I owned 3 of the buildings in his skyline view. The next morning, I called Mr. Calloway's attorney. He told me something interesting. The will specified the money came with no conditions. He said you'd try to give it away, the attorney said. His exact words were, "Make sure she keeps it for once." I hung up and opened my laptop. The first search was for luxury realtors. The second was for the most expensive nursing home in the state, the one where my mother lived, the one David hadn't visited in 2 years. I booked a meeting with the director to discuss upgrading her to the presidential suite. The real estate agent hesitated when I pointed to the listing in David's neighborhood. "That's the last waterfront lot in the community," she said, tapping her pen against the paperwork. "The HOA requires all plans to be approved by the board." I slid a check across the table for the full asking price, plus a 20% bonus if she could close in 7 days. I hired Richard Myers, the same architect David had raved about for months when planning his own home. At our first meeting, Richard pulled out David's blueprints from his files. "We designed this for your son last year," he said. I asked how much David had spent. When Richard said $1.2 million, I told him to triple the budget. His pencil froze mid-sketch. Construction started on a Tuesday. The crew arrived at 7 a.m. with heavy machinery that shook the windows in David's house. From my rental car across the street, I watched him storm out in his robe. He yelled at the foreman about noise ordinances. Then he saw the foundation markers, placed exactly 50 feet from his property line, the minimum distance required. His mouth opened, then closed. By week 3, the steel beams went up. David started parking at the end of his driveway to watch. One morning, I pulled up behind him in a new Mercedes. He didn't recognize me at first. I'd lost 15 pounds and dyed my hair blonde. When I rolled down the window, his coffee cup hit the pavement. "Mom?" The word came out strangled. I waved at the construction site. "Good view, isn't it?" The HOA president called me after David complained. "Your son says you're building this house to harass him," she said. I sent her the approved plans and a check for $25,000 to renovate the community clubhouse. The next day, the board voted unanimously to allow my rooftop terrace despite height restrictions. David's neighbors started introducing themselves when they saw me at the site. The couple next door brought lemonade and asked if I needed recommendations for interior designers. The woman across the street mentioned how David's dog always pooped on her lawn. "We never see him at community events," she said, stirring her drink. I smiled and told her I'd host the next holiday party. When the framing revealed the home's layout, David stood in the street for an hour. His house had 3 bedrooms. Mine had 6, plus a library and a theater room. His kitchen island seated 4. Mine had space for 12. The blueprints he'd once shown me with pride were now the budget version of what I was building. Jessica came by during week 6. She wore sunglasses and kept glancing at the master suite plans. "David said you got some inheritance," she started. I adjusted my hard hat and pointed to where the infinity pool would go. $8 million, I said, before investments. She left without asking the question I knew she came to ask. The community Facebook group started posting updates on my construction. Someone shared aerial shots of the progress. Another neighbor compared it to the modest homes nearby, including David's. The comments filled with emojis and questions about when they could tour it. David's last post in the group had been 6 months earlier, complaining about trash pickup times. By the time the stone facade went up, David stopped coming outside to watch, but I saw him at the window sometimes, his face half hidden by the blinds. His lawn grew patchy from lack of care. The basketball hoop he'd installed for future kids hung crooked. The final touch was the address numbers. 1912, the year my grandmother was born. The same woman whose ring I'd sold for David's tuition. I had the numbers cast in bronze and mounted beside the front door. They gleamed in the sunlight, visible from every angle of David's house. The first call came while I was meeting with the landscapers about installing a koi pond. I let it go to voicemail. David's message lasted exactly 38 seconds. I know because I timed it afterward. "Mom, I think there's been some misunderstanding about the whole eviction situation," his voice said through the speaker. He cleared his throat. "Jessica feels terrible about how we handled everything. Can we talk?" By the time they mounted the wrought iron gates, I had 12 missed calls. The voicemails escalated in tone. Message 3 mentioned my birthday coming up. Message 7 said Jessica wanted to cook my favorite meal. Around sunset, one arrived where David's voice cracked. "We drove past your new place today. It's impressive." In the background, I could hear Jessica saying something about property taxes. The next morning brought 17 more calls. David left a message saying they were expecting a baby. "Due in March," he said. "Like this changed everything. We're going to need more space soon." Later that day, another voicemail mentioned they'd put their house on the market. "The realtor says we could get 20% over asking if we sell before winter," he said, followed by a long pause. On day 3, the tone shifted. Message 23 came through at 1:17 a.m. David was drunk. "Remember when I was 7 and you sat up all night sewing that Batman costume?" His words slurred slightly. "I wore it for 3 weeks straight, even to bed. There was a clinking sound, maybe ice in a glass. Why won't you call me back, Mom?" Message 27 came 45 minutes later. Now he was angry. "You're really going to hold one mistake against me forever? After everything I've done for you?" Jessica's voice murmured something indistinct in the background. The call call cut off mid-sentence. The texts started arriving in clusters. First, photos of David as a toddler, me holding him at the beach, his first haircut, that time he won the spelling bee. Then came screenshots of their dwindling bank account with captions like, "The nursery costs alone are killing us." By midweek, the voicemails took on a transactional tone. "We could really use advice about trusts for the baby," David said in message 31. "Maybe you could introduce us to your financial planner?" Message 38 was just Jessica this time. She didn't say hello, just launched in. "The doctor says stress isn't good for the pregnancy. David hasn't slept in days." Her voice got quieter. "We can't afford the house payments with his firm cutting bonuses this year." There was a muffled argument, then the line went dead. The final 5 calls came during my housewarming party. David left one voicemail whispering like he was hiding in a closet. "Please, Mom, please." I listened to it while watching the caterers arrange lobster tails on ice sculptures. The message ended with something I never thought I'd hear, David sobbing. When I checked my call log later, I noticed something interesting. None of the 43 calls occurred before 10 a.m. or after midnight. Even desperate, David kept his sense of routine. The earliest came at 10:07 a.m. on a Tuesday, likely as soon as he got to his office. The latest arrived at 11:52 p.m., probably before his usual bedtime. The first warning came from Mrs. Henderson at Bible study. She pulled me aside after service, her hand trembling on my arm. "David came by last Thursday," she said. "He told the prayer group you've been showing signs of early dementia. Said someone needed to check on your finances." I hadn't missed a Sunday in 15 years, not even when I had pneumonia. That same week, 3 different church ladies asked if I needed rides to my doctor's appointments. David showed up at my bank on a Tuesday afternoon. The manager called me after he left. "Your son filed a concern about possible financial exploitation," she said. He'd claimed my new financial advisor, Mark, who I'd known since freshman year of college, was pressuring me into risky investments. The bank pulled my transaction history before realizing Mark didn't even have power attorney over my accounts. The elder abuse report arrived at Adult Protective Services the following Monday. David listed 7 red flags, from sudden lavish spending to uncharacteristic isolation from family. He cited my new house as proof someone was manipulating me, noting I'd never cared about material things before. The investigator showed up at my doorstep wearing a look of pity, right until I handed her the inheritance paperwork and photos of my former apartment's mold problem. She left apologizing for wasting my time. Our old neighbors started posting on the community Facebook group. Susan from 2 doors down wrote, "Such a shame when seniors get taken advantage of." Another commented about watching a suspicious black SUV come to my house weekly. That was Mark's car. He drove me to chemo when David forgot my diagnosis 20 years ago. The posts always ended with some version of, "Someone should check on poor David," having to watch this happen to his mother. David told people I'd stopped recognizing him during visits. At the grocery store, the cashier asked if I wanted help finding my way home. The pharmacist double-checked my prescription dosages. Even the mailman started leaving my packages at the door instead of handing them to me, like I might forget who he was. Then the business cards appeared in my mailbox. Assisted living facilities, dementia specialists, even a probate lawyer. David had circled one number in red pen with the note, "Call anytime, Mom." I recognized his handwriting from the Mother's Day cards he stopped sending after college. The turning point came when David emailed my contractor. He claimed I lacked mental capacity to approve construction changes and demanded copies of all contracts. The contractor forwarded it to me with a single question. Should I reply? I told him to send the full correspondence to Mark, who still practiced elder law on top of wealth management. Mark dug up security footage from when I signed the building permits. The timestamp showed me discussing drainage slopes with the architect, while David's email claimed I couldn't remember my own address. He pulled my credit reports going back a decade, all flawless. Then he found the kicker. David had taken out a second mortgage 2 weeks before filing the elder abuse claim. We didn't have to expose David ourselves. The HOA president's husband worked for the DA's office. When he heard about the false APS report, he made a few calls. The bank manager voluntarily testified about David's baseless fraud allegations. My pharmacy printed records showing I'd never missed a medication refill or double-ordered prescriptions. The final blow came from someone unexpected, Jessica's mother. She showed up at my house with a shoebox of printouts. "My daughter may be many things," she said, "but she won't be party to fraud." Inside were David's emails to their divorce attorney, bragging about soon controlling my assets once I was declared incompetent. The day my attorney filed the court documents, I sat in my home theater watching the notifications roll in. He'd sent the eviction notice David served me to every major neighborhood group chat, along with photos of my new properties, the penthouse, the beach house, even the vineyard in Tuscany I'd closed on that morning. The caption read simply, "For those concerned about Mrs. Whitmore's mental capacity." The community Facebook group exploded first. Susan from down the street posted the screenshot of David's shelter list with the comment, "This aged poorly." The HOA president shared security footage of me signing construction permits with perfect clarity. Someone even dug up old posts where David bragged about his investment property while I was still sleeping in my car. David's law firm called him into HR within 2 hours. His coworker's wife was in my book club and had seen the documents. By lunchtime, someone leaked his performance review mentioning ethical concerns with a client trust account last year. The timing looked suspicious. Exactly 1 week after he'd filed the elder abuse claim against me. Jessica changed her relationship status to separated. Her Instagram went private, then public again with all photos of David scrubbed. The The most telling deletion was their anniversary post from last month, the one where she'd written, "To the man who always puts family first." Her mother commented on the neighborhood thread, "Some people's true colors take decades to show. The church ladies organized a potluck in my honor. They held it in my unfinished ballroom, sitting on folding chairs between stacks of marble tiles. Mrs. Henderson brought her famous peach cobbler and apologized through tears. We should have known better," she said, handing me a card signed by the entire congregation. Inside was a collection for the foster care charity I'd mentioned starting. David's former Little League coach showed up unannounced with a box of my old photos he'd saved. "Found these when cleaning out the rec center," he said. There were shots of me coaching third base, running the snack stand, staying late to rake the field. In every picture, David was front and center while I hovered in the background. The coach hugged me hard before leaving. "You were always the MVP," he muttered into my shoulder. The bank called to report suspicious activity on David's accounts. He'd tried withdrawing $50,000, almost exactly the amount he'd claimed I wasted on my library. The teller recognized his name from the fraud allegations and stalled while calling security. By the time David reached the manager, his accounts were frozen pending investigation. Neighbors started sharing their own stories. The couple across from David's place revealed he'd reported them to the HOA for their dog barking. The same week, they refused to contribute to his campaign for board president. The teenager who mowed lawns said David never paid him after he trimmed their hedges last summer. Even the UPS driver mentioned how David would complain about delayed packages while ignoring his mother's birthday deliveries. Jessica's mother sent me screenshots of their family group chat. David had written, "This is all a misunderstanding. My mom's illness makes her paranoid." Jessica replied, "The only illness here is your greed." Her mother's final message was a photo of my new waterfront home with the caption, "Karma's view looks expensive." The community turned so thoroughly that the local paper ran a piece titled, "When the Abuser Gets Exposed." They didn't name David, but everyone knew. They quoted the APS investigator saying false reports waste resources meant for actual vulnerable seniors. The comments section filled with stories of other adult children exploiting parents. David's last-ditch effort came via email, a rambling message claiming Jessica had manipulated him. He attached their divorce filings, highlighting where she requested alimony. "You were right about her all along," he wrote. I forwarded it to Jessica's mother without comment. She replied with a single emoji, violin. The final humiliation came from an unexpected source, David's favorite golf club. They revoked his membership after the treasurer recognized my name on their waiting list. The manager called me personally to offer David's old tea time slot. "We prefer members with integrity," he said. I booked it for every Sunday morning when David used to play with his law partners. He rang the doorbell at 7:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Through the security camera, I watched David shift from foot to foot holding a manila envelope. His suit looked wrinkled, the same navy one he'd worn to his law school graduation. When I opened the door, he thrust out the envelope like a peace offering. "I brought these for you," he said. Inside were photos I hadn't seen in years. Our trip to Disneyland, the two of us building a snowman the winter Greg left. The handwritten letter shook in his hands as he read it aloud. "Dear Mom, I've made terrible mistakes." His voice cracked on the word mistakes. The apology cited stress, Jessica's influence, even his childhood trauma. He mentioned the kidney donation twice, but called it, "That time you helped Dad." At the bottom, he'd drawn a smiley face like he used to do in grade school notes. I let him finish before walking to my desk. The check had been ready for weeks, $28,750, calculated from my old tax returns and receipts I'd saved in a shoebox under my bed. Every expense was accounted for. $4,200 for his braces in 1998, $1,150 for summer camp in 2001, even the $37.50 for his 6th grade field trip to the Science Museum. I'd used an inflation calculator to adjust the amounts to current values. David's face went pale when he saw the number. "What is this?" he asked, turning the check over like it might be fake. I told him it represented every dollar I'd spent raising him, minus the college tuition since he'd gotten a degree from it. The total came out to $1,025 a year, less than what he'd spent last month on his golf club dues. He tried handing it back. "I don't want your money," he said, which made me laugh. I pointed out that he'd called 43 times after learning about my inheritance. His ears turned red. "That's not why," he started, but I cut him off. I asked if he remembered the Christmas when I sold my camera to buy him a PlayStation. He'd thrown a fit because it wasn't the newest model. The check wasn't about the money. It was about the math. Cold, hard numbers that couldn't be argued with. I'd saved every receipt, every canceled check, even the notebook where I tracked cash payments for his school lunches. The records filled 3 banker's boxes in my storage unit. I told David he could verify the amounts with my accountant. He started crying then, big messy tears that dripped onto his tie. He said Jessica had left him and taken the baby. His law firm was investigating the false elder abuse claim. The neighbors had keyed his car. None of it surprised me. What surprised me was how little I felt watching him fall apart on my Italian leather sofa. David asked if I remembered the Batman costume again. I did. I'd sewn it by hand after working a double shift, my fingers bleeding from the needle. He'd worn it until the seams frayed. Now here he was, 34 years old, using that memory as currency. I told him to cash the check quickly before his accounts got seized in the divorce. The number $28,750 wasn't random. It represented represented exactly half of what the state calculated as average child rearing costs during those years. I'd only charged for material expenses, not my time or emotional labor. The math was brutal in its fairness. I'd spent less than most parents because I had less to give. David left the photos but took the check. He paused at the door and asked if I'd ever forgive him. I didn't answer. Through the window, I watched him walk past the fountain in my driveway, his shoulders hunched against the security lights. The check would clear. I'd made sure of that, but the bank wouldn't tell him I'd set up automatic monthly deposits to his account for exactly $1,025, scheduled to stop when the total reached $28,750. The notification popped up while I was having breakfast in Ubud. A mutual friend had tagged David in a post. "Congrats on the new baby boy." The timestamp showed the birth happened at 2:17 a.m. Bali time. I took a sip of my coffee and swiped over to my camera roll. I'd taken a sunset photo 3 hours earlier at Tanah Lot Temple, the waves crashing against the rocks in the background. I posted it with the caption, "New beginnings look different at 60. David's sister-in-law liked it within minutes. So did Jessica's cousin. I didn't block any of them. Let them see the infinity pool at my villa, the spa treatments, the private driver. That afternoon, I booked a helicopter tour over the volcanoes. The pilot took a photo of me smiling in the headset, the jungle stretching endlessly below. I made it my profile picture right as David posted his first blurry hospital photo. At first, the timing was deliberate. When they shared the baby's name, Ethan Gregory, I uploaded a video of me releasing a sea turtle with the same initials. When David posted about sleepless nights, I shared a story of my sunrise yoga session. But around week 3, something shifted. I stopped checking their profiles altogether. The resort manager asked if I wanted to extend my stay. I said yes without thinking about the due date I'd once circled in red on my calendar. My phone buzzed constantly, not with David's calls anymore, but with alerts from the foster care charity I'd started funding. A caseworker sent photos of a 16-year-old girl moving into her first apartment, paid for by my scholarship. Her smile reminded me of David when I brought him home from the group home. I missed the baby's first Christmas. Not on purpose, I simply forgot. I was on a liveaboard dive trip with no cell service when they posted the pictures. David looked exhausted in the photos, his hair thinner than I remembered. Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes. The presents under their tree looked sparse compared to the extravagant gifts I used to scramble to afford. When I got back to shore, there was a voicemail from David's number. I almost deleted it unplayed, but curiosity won. It was just background noise. A baby crying. Jessica snapping at someone to fix the damn bottle. David must have pocket dialed me. I saved it as evidence of karma and went to dinner. The indifference surprised me most when it came to legal matters. Mark emailed that David was subpoenaing my financial records for his divorce. I told him to comply fully. Let David see every penthouse, every stock dividend, the vineyard purchase. The next week, Mark forwarded David's settlement offer. He'd dropped the request if I wrote a character witness letter for him. I replied with a screenshot of the eviction notice he'd served me. By Ethan's first birthday, I had to be reminded of the date by Facebook. I was in Provence that week, tasting wines for my new import business. The vineyard owner's daughter handed me a glass of rosé just as my phone buzzed with a notification. David had shared a collage of baby photos. I swiped it away without opening and asked about soil acidity levels. The final test came when Jessica's mother messaged me. She said David was struggling financially after losing his law firm partnership. She included his new address, a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex I recognized as borderline unsafe. I read the message twice, waiting for the pang of maternal instinct. It never came. I blocked her and went back to editing photos for my travel blog. The first scholarship check was for $5,000, the exact amount I'd spent on David's first semester textbooks. I sent it to a group home in Chicago with one condition. The money had to go to a kid who'd been returned by multiple foster families. The director called me crying when the check arrived. She said they'd just gotten a 15-year-old boy who reminded her of David at that age. Same defiant stare, same distrust of adults. I met Jamal 6 months later at a diner near his new apartment. He showed up wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, the tag still on the sleeve. He'd used part of the money to buy interview clothes for his internship at a mechanic shop. Over pancakes, he told me about bouncing between 7 homes before aging out of the system. When I mentioned I'd adopted a boy once, he nodded with his mouth full. "That's why you get it," he said. He didn't ask why my son wasn't in my life. The second scholarship went to a girl named Elena, who wanted to be a social worker. She sent me a handwritten note on lined notebook paper. "I'll be the kind of caseworker who actually listens," she wrote. I framed it next to David's first Mother's Day card, the one where he'd traced his hand in glitter glue. By year 2, I'd funded 12 full-ride community college scholarships. The program director asked if I wanted to name them after David. I said no. These kids deserved their own legacy, not someone else's ghost. Instead, we called it the Second Chance Fund. The first graduate sent me a photo of her nursing pin with a text, "You gave me what my own mom never could. Options." I started visiting the group homes myself, bringing pizza and college applications instead of toys. The kids called me Auntie Moneybags until they saw my arms. One girl pointed to the scar from David's father's kidney transplant. "You got hurt helping someone," she said. It wasn't a question. The donations grew as my investments did. I bought a duplex near the community college and let scholarship kids live there rent-free. The rules were simple: stay in school, don't trash the place, and text me if the hot water stopped working. Jamal became the unofficial superintendent, fixing leaky faucets in exchange for home-cooked meals. At one of our dinners, he asked why I didn't just give the money to my son. I showed him the spreadsheet where I tracked every dollar David ever cost me, $287,450 adjusted for inflation. Jamal whistled. "Damn, Auntie, he'd have to save your life twice to break even." The foster care agency invited me to speak at their fundraiser last spring. I told them about finding David in that activity room, how his shoes were 2 sizes too small. I didn't mention the eviction communication or the missed calls. Afterward, a woman approached me with a toddler on her hip. I aged out of the system too, she said. My kid will never know that pain. She handed me a drawing her daughter had made, a stick figure woman with a yellow circle above her head. She says you look like the sun. I keep that drawing in my wallet now. When I see it, I don't think about David's college graduation or the Batman costume. I think about Elena passing her social work exam, about Jamal opening his own garage, about the duplex's backyard full of mismatched lawn chairs where kids who never had family dinners eat together every Sunday. The subpoena arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked embarrassed to be there. David's divorce attorney demanded 5 years of my financial records, bank statements, property deeds, even receipts for jewelry purchases. Mark called before I'd finished reading. They're trying to prove you hid assets from David, he said. I could hear him shuffling papers. Jessica's claiming he stole marital funds to harass you. I told Mark to send them everything. Every penthouse receipt, every vineyard invoice, the $8,000 Chanel bag I bought just because I could. Let them see the $287,450 I'd already accounted for in that check to David. Let them see the $1.2 million in foster care scholarships. Most importantly, let them see the paper trail proving I'd inherited the money after David evicted me. Mark filed the countersuit the next day. Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and malicious prosecution for the false elder abuse claim. We included screenshots of David's HOA complaints about my construction, his emails to the bank accusing me of fraud, even the shelter list Jessica had printed. The court date got set for 3 months out, right in the middle of David's partnership review at the law firm. His first settlement offer came through Jessica's attorney. They wanted me to sign a statement saying David had acted out of concern for my well-being. In exchange, he'd dropped the subpoena. I had Mark respond with a photo of me sitting in my car outside the laundromat, time-stamped the night David evicted me. The caption read, "This was his concern?" David's firm placed him on administrative leave when the court documents became public. The legal blog Above the Law ran a piece titled, "When Lawyers Become Bullies." Someone leaked his personnel file showing 2 prior warnings about client trust accounts. His managing partner called me personally to apologize. "We had no idea about the kidney donation," he kept saying, like that was the worst part. The divorce got ugly fast. Jessica's attorney subpoenaed David's law firm emails and found messages where he'd bragged about getting control of my assets. She used them to argue he'd wasted marital funds on frivolous litigation. The judge awarded her full custody of Ethan plus 60% of David's retirement account. I know because Jessica's mother sent me the ruling with a smiley face drawn next to the amount. David tried calling me one last time the night before his firm voted on his partnership. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't mention the lawsuit or the money. Instead, he talked about Ethan's first steps, how the baby had held onto the coffee table and looked so proud. His voice broke when he said, "He has your eyes, Mom." I deleted the message without saving it. The firm voted unanimously to dismiss him. 3 associates came forward saying David had pressured them to work on his personal lawsuits during billable hours. His office got packed up by security while he was in court for our hearing. The judge dismissed his subpoena with prejudice and ordered him to pay my legal fees, $43,000, almost exactly what his share of the nursery furniture cost. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that David moved into an extended stay motel near the highway, the same one where I'd looked at rates the night he evicted me. Someone saw him working at a legal aid clinic, handling traffic tickets for people who couldn't afford lawyers. Jessica's mother said he visits Ethan every other Sunday at a Chuck E. Cheese. The final court order came in a plain manila envelope. David had to complete 100 hours of community service, ironically at a senior center. He couldn't contact me for 3 years unless through an attorney. The judge included a handwritten note at the bottom of the ruling. "Ms. Whitmore, I've seen many elder abuse cases. Yours is the first where the abuser got outsmarted by his victim. Sometimes the people we love most hurt us the deepest. I learned that blood doesn't make family. Actions do. If you're watching this after giving everything and getting nothing back, I want you to hear this. Your worth isn't defined by how others treat you. I used to think sacrifice was love. Now I know self-respect is love too. That eviction letter didn't end my story. It freed me to start a better one."